Welcome to The Future Unleashed from Lincoln College, Oxford. I'm your host, Helen O'Hara, and joining me today is Lynn Shepherd, also known to some of you by her pen name, Cara Hunter. That is the name under which she has written an Oxford-based series of detective novels starring DCI Adam Foley. Close to Home was shortlisted by the British Book Awards in 2019 for Crime Book of the Year, and No Way Out was named by the Sunday Times as one of the 100 greatest crime novels since 1945. Cara's novels have also sold over 1 million copies worldwide. Today we're filming in the magnificent surroundings of Lincoln College Chapel. This was built in the early 1600s in a period of just 2 years and features really impressive enamelled glass windows by Abraham van Leen. The ornate carvings on the pews and the incredible gilded ceiling were added a bit later in the 1680s, but otherwise it's pretty much unchanged since. So today the chapel welcomes visitors of all faiths and is open for blessings, for christenings, for weddings, and still very much in use as a part of college life. So welcome back, Lynn.
Thank you.
So just for those people who haven't yet read your books, can you tell us briefly about the books you write as Cara Hunter?
As Cara Hunter, well, there's been 6 books on the Oxford series, which is one that you were talking about. And I never actually intended it to be a series. It was one of those things where I got an idea for the first book, which is all about the twist. So if anyone has read that, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'm not going to say what it is because it's a massive spoiler. But I got that idea and then had to, as it were, work backwards from that idea to create the story which would lead up to that twist. And because it's a book about a missing child, it inevitably had a police angle, of course. So Adam Foley, who now sort of carries it like Atlas on his shoulder, he had just started out as a piece of plot machinery. He was the necessary police officer. But in a way that was quite good because it meant his character could evolve in that book without sort of feeling that he was going to have to go somewhere else afterwards. But having sold that book, and I was really very lucky because it went to auction. So that's like a writer's dream, publishers bidding for your book rather than you trying to sell it to them. So once it actually got published, they said, no, we want a series. So suddenly this man was all important, and I was quite lucky that I'd made him quite relatable in the first book. So he's had another 5 published outings since then. I'm currently writing the next one, which is the 7th. But the most recent book, which we'll probably come on to, was actually a standalone. So that was nothing to do with Oxford, nothing to do with Adam. I let him have a break from me and me have a break from him.
Yeah, I suppose that's healthy in any relationship, right?
Exactly, and you sort of go back to it with renewed excitement. I mean, a friend of mine who's a writer calls it a palate cleanser, doing a standalone. You go back to the rest of the meal thinking, oh yeah, I really like this, I'm going back to it. So yeah, it certainly worked. And in terms of getting in a new audience, and actually it was a very successful book, the most recent one. So it worked from lots of points of view.
Yeah. So tell me about, you have written as Lynn Shepherd as well as Cara Hunter. And it may seem counterintuitive to use different names. You've built up an audience under one. So what's the sort of benefit? Why do this in publishing?
Well, it's a very common thing in publishing. So anyone who's actually been through that industry will know that publishing has an addiction, and the addiction is to debut writers. So they're always wanting to launch somebody as a debut. And if you switch genres, then obviously that's an opportunity to do that. You can become a whole new person. But in a way it's sensible because what I wrote before in my own name they were mystery stories as well, but they were historical. So they were all set in the 19th century. So going back to my first love, which is English, which I studied here. So there was one that was an Austen-related murder, then I had the Dickens one, and then it was Frankenstein, and then it was Dracula. That's the gift that keeps on giving. But I sort of ran out of the 19th century at that point and sort of fell off the end. And I suppose I sort of had the time I wanted with that series, and I didn't have any more ideas. And bought the house in Oxford, which needed huge amounts of work, so that's like a slow motion nervous breakdown while you're doing that. And I thought I'd finished writing, I really did. I thought, I've done that, I can tick that box. But actually, at the end of that year, when finally all the builders were out of my hair, I got the idea I was talking about just now, the twist for this modern crime book. And the publisher said, well, there's no point in keeping your old name because you won't actually have a lot of carryover. Why didn't you think of something else? So we ended up with Cara Hunter, which I quite like, she sounds a lot younger than me, so I'm very happy with that as a name. And sort of Hunter's a good name for a crime writer anyway.
Yes, it feels right for a detective novel. But let's talk about genre fiction though, because, you know, you did study literature, you know, you could, I'm sure, write quote unquote literary fiction if you wanted. You've said you always really wanted to be a mystery writer. What is it about the mystery kind of format, I guess, that's so appealing?
I think it's because it makes people turn the page. I mean, humans are hardwired to be nosy. I mean, we just want to know what happens. Or, you know, the first thing that happens if someone says they've got a secret is you try and get it out of them, don't you? I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's any relevance to you. It's just, we have this compulsion to know what happens and to find out secrets. So I think that the sort of the energy of a mystery novel is absolutely invaluable for a writer. And then you can play with that energy, and then you get into the idea of twists and sort of playing with the reader's expectations. So I've always loved doing that. And then lots of great pieces of literature. Look at Bleak House, which is one of the ones I work with in my own books. That's a murder story. I mean, no one ever bills it as a murder story, but it is actually a murder story. So, you know, this sort of blurring between what's literary and what isn't, I think is quite a modern thing, really.
But that's interesting, because in terms of, you know, we're talking about the future of publishing today, really, and the future of writing, I suppose. And there is a kind of an issue with genre, but also with, you know, again, this idea of brand names and this idea of having series is running. And, you know, is publishing dependent now on series? Is that something that you see continuing into the future?
I suppose it's like TV in a way, in that once you've got a brand or a franchise that works, and they just keep coming back, or they just keep remaking old ones that worked quite well 20 years ago or whatever. I mean, there's certainly a lot of appetite for series if you can get it off the ground, but you've obviously got to get the establishment of the series going, so people will invest in your characters, people will want to come back. So I'm often asked, you know, how long will you keep writing Adam Foley books? And the answer is, well, as long as people want to read them. I'm not going to carry on doing it if no one's interested anymore. But, you know, it is nice to have a series, and it does bring you a lot of advantages, both for you as a writer and obviously for the publisher. You just have to avoid being put in a position where you just have to keep churning them out, because that's the real danger. The last thing you want is for them to start trailing off and becoming formulaic. No, that's one of the things that keeps me awake at night.
You're not franchising it out then to other writers?
No. You have to be a really big name to have your name big, and then the small person who does actually all the work on the front cover.
But there has always been a kind of a snobbery around genre fiction. Now, I am a sci-fi and fantasy girl, so this is not something I share. But, you know, do you see that breaking down at all? Do you see that getting better?
Actually, funnily enough, no. No, I don't. I still think that there is a sort of inherent sense that some books are better than others just because of the genre they're in. And there are some book festivals where they don't do crime. It's sort of seen as not quite the thing. And I think there's only ever been one crime, you know, overtly crime book that's been shortlisted for the Booker Prize, for example.
Wow.
And I remember being asked that at a festival, saying, why, you know, could there ever be a crime book winning the Booker Prize? And I remember saying, well, why not? You know, as if, why was I even being asked that question? And I think sometimes people who read crime sort of tell themselves it's not crime, if you see what I mean. So I imagine something like Mick Herron, for example, really talented, and loads of people read his books, but I bet they're not telling themselves that they're spy fiction or crime fiction. They're thinking of them as literary fiction. So, you know, you tell yourself about what you're reading as much as everything else in your life.
So, I mean, who decides what gets to be quote-unquote literary fiction and what's genre?
Publishers, I suppose, because it's all about how you pitch it to retailers. And also, something like crime has become the most elastic category imaginable these days. I mean, you've got everything from spy fiction at the other end of the continuum, which I actually don't think is crime. I think it's something slightly separate, all the way through to stuff that's sort of supernatural in tone, where it's the ghost did it. Oh, that's convenient. Don't get me started on ghosts that commit crimes. I mean, it's seen as a very popular category. It's seen as the one that sells. That's where all the money's made. So, yes, publishers will put all sorts of things into crime fiction if they can get away with it.
But yeah, that is interesting because you know, even I know crime is like the big genre in terms of sales. Crime and romance, I guess, which are the ones that publishers don't necessarily like to talk about very much for reasons.
Apart from in sales meetings.
But I mean, we talk about these genres like they're fixed and sort of siloed off, but as you say, it is more of a spectrum, and there's a lot more maybe crossover than I think people maybe talk about it.
Especially now, I mean, you being sci-fi and fantasy, this whole romantasy thing, which has sort of come up on the inside and taken everybody by surprise. And I think even the publishers who are now sort of falling over themselves to find romantasy writers. And I think that's a sort of hybridization that's going on, not just within sort of printed genres, if you like, so romance coming together with fantasy, but also between fiction on the page and other genres like TV or gaming in particular. A lot of crossover going on there, I think, which is very interesting, which can be very productive and interesting and innovative. If you look at the gaming industry, I mean, that's worth, I think I saw an article in the FT that said it's worth like 280 billion, whereas all of publishing is 11. So look at the difference there, and you can certainly see why publishing perhaps, and certainly writers start thinking, maybe I should be writing for games and not writing for books. And there are people who do both. And I think that's another interesting angle, that you can actually have crossover between the types of writing you do and the creation of a world which you can do in games, which you can't do in quite the same way on the page. So I think that's very, very interesting and potentially very positive, but it all depends on how it goes, I suppose.
That's interesting. So sort of game storytelling and novelistic, if you like, storytelling just kind of beginning to cross over and crossbreed, if you like.
Everything is possible in the gaming world. Not one narrative, which you have in a book. The writer decides where the story goes. But in gaming, it can go anywhere based on the decision you make. You might never know that there is a house in the corner where the answer was because you walked past it, you know. And you can also be part of a different person's point of view as well. You can play the parts of different characters. So the type of sort of emotional immersion that you get can vary, even by doing the same game more than once. So I find that fascinating. I think there's a lot to be learnt from that in terms of how do we bring fiction forwards.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of bringing fiction forwards, and certainly for a new generation, you know, there's been an explosion in the popularity of what's referred to as BookTok.
Oh, yes.
Which you might have to explain to listeners and to viewers. But how important do you think that is?
Oh, it's become enormously important. I have my own personal BookTok story, which I'll get onto. But basically, it's TikTok for books. So it's fairly straightforward. But it's become an enormously powerful and autonomous community. The whole romantasy thing is basically driven by people on BookTok who decided that this is what they wanted to read. And there are certain writers as well who have become absolute million sellers, like Colleen Hoover, simply because they were picked up by the quite specific type of demographic, which is generally young women on BookTok. But the thing about BookTok is that it can drive the success of a book, but you can't make that happen. I mean, it sort of drives publishers mad because, of course, they can't do anything. It either happens or it doesn't. Now, I actually have my own BookTok story, which was a marvellous thing that happened to me in the middle of last year when the book was first out, the most recent one, which is quite a different type of book to normal books in that it's written entirely as a screenplay. So on the page it looks very different, and I've got lots of artwork and family trees and maps and all sorts of things. I get really excited about doing this. I'm a complete geek. But it was a big departure for me, and nothing really quite like that has been written before, at least in crime. So what happened when the book came out, there was quite a lot of interest in this different format to it. And then I got this phone call from a friend on Sunday morning, out of the blue, saying, "You've gone viral." Well, that certainly hadn't happened to me before. It turned out it was this young woman who'd done an unboxing video, or a book mail video, as they call them. So it does what it says on the tin. It's somebody opening a box to see what book's in it, or opening an envelope. And these things last like 12 seconds. So she gets out the book and shows them what it looks like on the front, and then flicks through it. And I think that was the crucial thing from my point of view, because it looks so different. It really does. And I think that's what sort of caught people's eye. And eventually, I think within 24 hours, there are like 1 million views, and now it's up to about 7 million views. And the book ended up a New York Times bestseller, and it was all down to that. That's the power of BookTok. It's nothing I did, nothing my publishers did. I mean, obviously I wrote the book, but I didn't make it do that. That needed something completely beyond my control. And it's really important, I think, to see that as positive in a much more general way, in that it shows the power of reading and the power of that community, how many people there are who are tapping into BookTok, and they're young women mostly. There are some men, but it's mostly, like most readerships are predominantly women. And they're reading physical books, because physical books are so much more easy to video. So it just shows you all the things we say about reading dying, they're not true.
I wanted to ask about the format of that book as well. So that's Murder in the Family. And, you know, as you say, it is kind of a multimedia book. So once again, you know, it's kind of genres breaking down, it's formats, if you like, crossing over and inspiring one another, I guess. Absolutely,
because I'm a complete fan of true crime TV. I mean, it's my guilty pleasure, and I just say it's research. I mean, you know, I'm getting away with that. But I really find the way those documentaries are presented very interesting in terms of the different ways in which stories are told. So there's one in particular that I admire very much, where there's no narrative voice at all. It's simply created by putting together all the social media and sort of videos and things from the people involved, particularly from the woman, sadly, who ends up getting killed. It's her life leading up to this terrible event. And there's no narrative voice at all. So we're only seeing clips of things, and we're having to put together the story from that. And that was very inspirational from my point of view. I thought, I want to see if I can do that in terms of a story, take the narrator out entirely. And the irony, really, in a way, is this thing about there's nothing new under the sun, because people now call these epistolary novels. And that's what Samuel Richardson was writing in the 1740s. I wrote my doctorate on that. So I've suddenly gone from, you know, writing an academic book about epistolary fiction in the 18th century, and now I'm writing it again. And that was the last word I expected to hear in this context. But there you are, just shows you things come back round.
Now, one thing about the BookTok community is they love a physical book. It feels like that has almost single-handedly brought back, you know, painted edges and gilding and hardcovers and really gorgeous book design. Is that, it's a weird thing that even as we have Kindles and we have all these ebooks, we're kind of fetishizing the real thing maybe more than ever.
Exactly, I think that's wonderful, because publishers have realised that there is value in the physical book, and that you can treasure a physical book in a way that you can't your Kindle. I mean, it's great for going on holiday. You can load it up and have no weight in your suitcase, but you can't sort of, you know, write in it. You can't get the author to sign it. You can't give it as a special present to somebody. And I think they've really worked out that the value of asking people perhaps to spend a little bit more, but get something very special. As you say, there's beautiful, you know, edges that are painted now, and just sort of collector's items almost. And there's something new called bookshelf wealth. Have you seen about this?
I think I have that.
Yeah. So it's all about, you show pictures of your room and the books on your shelves. So partly it's about, have you actually really read all of those? But certainly the people are telling you how to arrange your book collection to reflect your own personality. So books are becoming sort of ways to communicate who you are. I suppose they always have been. I mean, I remember people always saying when I was younger, you know, you can always tell about a guy you might want to date by what's on his bookshelf. I mean, it was always very revealing. But now it's become this sort of part of a lifestyle trend, you know, of how do you put them up on them. And things like colours of spines, that's another thing. Instagram is a big place for this. So the physical book on Instagram, because it has colour and texture, can be used to create beautiful images. And you see people do rainbow shelves, and you see them, you know, creating like a still life with the book in the middle. And there's another lovely trend that I see quite a lot, where they do an acrostic. So they have a pile of books, Ooh. And there's an acrostic with the first letter of each of the titles, and it spells something. So you can't do that with an electronic book, but you can have that sort of fun. People are playing with physical books, which I think is fantastic.
I keep seeing people on Instagram rebinding books, either in leather or in that sort of cloth penguin style.
Yeah,
it's really impressive.
And there's someone I see on Instagram who actually paints the pages. So she puts them into like a flower press, so they're really, really tight, and then does this most beautiful artwork on the actual pages of the book. So people are being very creative, you know, which has to be a good thing.
I mean, is that a hollowing out of the middle, though, if you have your sort of your 99p Kindle book and your £45 special edition bound in leather? Is there sort of, are we losing something, or is it okay?
I don't think so. I don't see why we should. I mean, a lot of people still buy paperbacks, and I think a lot of people buy paperbacks and will read them once and then pass them on, and that again is a good thing. We're back to the 18th century where people would always pass on a book then because it was too expensive, you would actually share. But it's the same idea. I mean, I would buy a hardback for non-fiction, but I would tend to buy fiction in paperback, and I think a lot of people do that. So it's performing a different function, that middle market.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are the challenges, I guess, and the worries? I mean, a lot of people are talking about AI as regards to writing. Is it something you worry about? Is it something that seems like a threat to your genre, to your area of publishing?
Well, I think AI is a threat to pretty much everything, isn't it? Let's face it, we just don't know where it's going, and I think that's that quality of being unknown. Certainly for writers, I mean, there's no accident we had the strike in Hollywood where people are starting to think, can a machine do what I do? And the trouble is, machines learn so much more quickly than we do. They can absorb 1 million pages in a nanosecond, and there's no way a human can do that. Obviously, up until now, it's mostly been about replication, so that they can churn out formulaic versions of things. But we're definitely getting to the point where we've got innovation and origination in things that AI produces. And it won't be long before they're actually getting better and better at that. So yes, I think AI is a threat to human writers. But I suppose you then have to take a step back and say, well, what's the goal here? Is it to produce more good content for people to read, in which case does it matter where it's come from? Or is it to encourage human creativity? In which case, yes, it probably is a problem because a machine is cheaper by definition and quicker by miles than a human will ever be.
Can it still be kept as a sort of tool for writers, or does it sort of democratize things to such a degree that you don't need any skills at all, really?
I don't think it'll be long before the machine can do it. I mean, everyone can. There's a website now where you can go and see if your books have been used to teach AI, and that's a weird sensation. It's a sort of Frankenstein moment where you think, well, no one asked me about this. Certainly no one paid me to do this. You've just taken my books and you've learnt something from them as a machine. That's a strange feeling. And I know a lot of writers are trying to fight back against that, but it feels a wee bit like King Canute on the beach.
Well, let's get back to the audience, though. So most books are read by women.
Mm-hmm.
This is, it's over 50%. This is just factual. But it feels like most column inches in sort of literary publications are devoted to work by male writers and mostly written by male critics, I think, to a slight degree as well. Does that seem like it's changing? Has publishing had that sort of Me Too moment, that sort of Time's Up moment of examining itself and looking at some of its biases?
Oh, absolutely, I think so. I mean, after all these centuries of men owning books in every sense of the word, I don't think that's true anymore. My experience of publishing is it's female-led and female-dominated. I don't think I've ever had a man on any of my publishing teams. Seriously, everything from copywriting through to marketing and PR, it's always been women. So it's a very, very strong female-led industry. As for the column inches thing, I don't know. I mean, crime is so dominated by women, and those are the reviews I tend to see most of. I would say there's more female critics and certainly more female writers than there ever have been, and the pendulum has definitely swung in that direction. So in terms of crime, anyway, I think we've cracked it. Whether in literary fiction there's more work to do, perhaps I'm not the right person to ask.
So I guess what are the sort of threats and opportunities you see in the next decade or so? Is AI the big question right now?
I mean, like most things, a threat can also be an opportunity. It all depends what. Sometimes that's out of your control, but that's the thing about AI. That's one of those threats that is possibly going to be quite hard to turn into an opportunity because we don't know where it's going. Its capacities are apparently or seem to be almost infinite, and its ability to make decisions is now becoming rather concerning, certainly for me in the wider sense of what AI can do. So AI, I think, is the sort of devil we don't know. The other one that I suppose is a potential threat that I think actually is an opportunity is sort of competition from other media, as we've been discussing. So TV, a box set you can watch in the same time it takes to read a book, and you can get just as immersed in that. So that's now competition in the way that it wasn't when you only got one episode on a Sunday night. It couldn't compete with books in the same way because you weren't in control of how you consumed that, whereas now you are with TV most of the time. So that's now a threat or an opportunity. What do we draw from in the way TV works. And certainly when I was starting to write the Foley books, I wanted them to feel like TV crime, like something like Line of Duty, where it's really fast, it's really snappy, lots of changes of scene, changes of perspective. So I was drawing on what TV could do to try and replicate that on the page. And again, this idea of what can we draw from gaming? What is it that young people find so compelling about playing games that we could actually put on the page, or at least learn from that, find different ways of telling narratives. So there's a huge opportunity in the competition, but not necessarily opportunity. It all depends how people sees that, and publishers have to stay ahead of trends as well and see where these things are coming from and be open to actually learning from other media and not just seeing them as competition.
It's not the same thing, but I was literally talking the other night. There's a weird thing in films that you can make a great video game movie as long as it's not based on an existing video game. If you're using the sort of logic of games, you can make a great film. But if you base it on a game, it never works for some reason. It's a really strange thing.
That's really interesting.
I feel like there's something maybe similar going on with.
Yes, and I think we don't quite know what it is yet. And we get there's certainly a sense that there's something going on in games, and it's about narrative and it's about immersion. But how do we sort of take something from that and make it into something that works in fiction? So I don't think we're quite there. We certainly haven't sort of worked it out. But there's certainly a lot of interesting cross-fertilisation going on, and some very good fiction writers who are very much involved in video games as well. So I think that's where it's going. It's just not quite clear exactly how we do that yet. But that's a good thing, because you just have to stay open-minded.
Okay, how would you describe Lincoln in 3 words?
Oh gosh, that's a terrible question. Home, in one sense. Warm. And proud, yeah. First one, home, I think, partly because I've actually been here twice. I was here as an undergraduate in the 80s, and then I came back and did a doctorate in 2003, which was really interesting because some things had changed, mostly to do with technology, and some things hadn't changed at all. It's always so welcoming when you do come back, and because it's always been a relatively small community, you know a lot of people, and that really does ground you. So that's why home for me, I think. Second one, warm. Warm again, I think, is the community, and that brings in everybody. It's the staff as well. I think some other colleges I've been to, you get a sense there's a real divide between the staff, certainly the sort of non-teaching staff, and the students, and I've never felt that here. It always seems that everybody's part of the same place, and it's a very beautiful place, and everyone appreciates that and tries to cherish it. But yes, warm would be another really powerful word for Lincoln, I think. Proud would be the last one, and I think that's because we achieve a lot for a small college. We're not one of the ones that, if you ask people in the street, name me 3 Oxford colleges, I'm sure you wouldn't come up with us, but we've achieved a lot. We've had a lot of very important people over the years who've achieved incredible things. And if you look at the pictures of the women in Hall, commemorating 40 years, the things that people have actually done and have brought to the world from such a small place, we should be really proud of that.
That's lovely, yeah. And in this series, we are focusing on the future. So what advice would you give, young people who are at Lincoln at the moment as they sort of, are stewards of the future of the college and indeed, the world, I guess?
Be prepared to work hard. You will earn your luck. I've always believed that. When they say about opportunity, it tends to turn up wearing overalls and looking like work, but it's still an opportunity. And be confident. Be confident. I wish I'd been more confident when I left. I wish I'd had more confidence in myself and what I could achieve. And I think, but perhaps that just comes with age. But yeah, I think that's what I would say to my younger self and to young people here now.
Lynn Shepherd, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for inviting me.